Hi, Dr. Isley. We are going to make an interview about your research. We would like to start with our conversation with asking you, what is dust?
Dust is fine particles that are in our air. So usually we can't see them in the air because they're very small, but we might see them if it's a dust storm and there's lots of particles in the air. And we also see them when they settle in our homes. So they settle on benches and shelves and on our floors as well.
So when it comes to what is dust, is there any percentage of the ingredient of the dust? For example, can you make any proportion, like that percentage is that skin, that percentage is coming out of wall? Is there any percentage?
It depends from home to home, but for the most part, about 1/3 of our dust comes from dead skin cells and from hair, and also there's a component from fibers on our clothing and fibers from our furnishings. Then about another 1/3 of it would come in from outside your home. So that comes in on people's feet when they walk in, or it comes in when the wind blows, and another 1/3 comes from sources inside the home. So perhaps from peeling paint or other activities that you do in your home that create dust. Even things like dropped food becomes dust in our home.
Dr. Isley, to make your screen bigger, I'm gonna close my shut down my video. Will it be all right for you?
That's fine.
Okay. Oh no, that's not good. Oh, I will just start again. Okay. So can you tell us what was your, or what is it still ongoing?
It's still ongoing. Yes.
Okay.
The program is.
What is your research? What is your research? What did you achieve by the end of your research?
So we set out to tell people what contaminants were in their homes. We started with a program looking at soil, where people were growing vegetables and concerned about contaminants in their soil. But then people started to ask about contaminants inside their home. And we extended the program to sample people's homes. So they take a sample from their vacuum cleaner and they put it in a plastic bag and send it to us. And we tell them what metals are in their dust. And these are the metals that are potentially toxic to our health. So arsenic, cadmium, chromium, copper, manganese, nickel, and lead. And if people have high levels of these in their homes, we also give them information on how to reduce those contaminants in their home.
What will you achieve by the end of your research? What is your main point?
We started out wanting to help the community by knowing what contaminants are in their home, but also it's very interesting to us to see this information. We've been able to see patterns of what the sources of dust are in homes, and very interesting to me is that of all of the countries in the world that we sampled 35 countries, the same sources keep appearing in different countries. And one of those sources was from leaded petrol and leaded paints. And another of those sources was from building materials that have just deteriorated over time. And the third source that we saw in most countries was soil. So just soil coming into the house. And that really didn't change from country to country. We were expecting to see that maybe very high income countries and very low income countries were different, but there are some differences, but for the most part, dust is fairly much the same in many countries of the world.
Okay. What is the most interesting outcome regarding your research?
One of the outcomes that was interesting to me was we had a very unusual lead source in Ghana, and it was different to the leaded paint and petrol source that we saw in other countries. And so I looked at the cities that those samples had come from, and I discovered that they were cities where electronic waste was best. So you have electronic components and wiring being burned, and the dust is going into the air and coming down homes across the city. And that's
Dr.
what we
Isley,
were seeing.
Dr. Isley, sorry to interrupt you, but there is, I can see a message which says Cynthia Isley's network band is low. So I'm going to ask that question again, if you wouldn't mind it. Just because when you, do you know, sometimes when the internet speed is low, sometimes the sound is going to be mechanized. Do you know what I mean?
Yes.
So you just mechanized with your sound. So I will ask that question, sorry to ask it again, because the recording was not clear. So what is the most interesting outcome of your research?
One of the interesting findings was that there was a lead source in Ghana that didn't match the leaded paint and petrol source that we saw in most other countries. And I investigated where the samples were from, and they were from a city mainly that had electronic waste recycling. And so people are burning electronic components and wiring, and the metals from those components are going into the air. And then we're finding them in dust in homes from across the city.
So if we take that information, can we make any generalization? Like if you live in a place where you can see a lot of factories, mostly the chemical product manufacturing ones, do you think that we are much more exposed to higher risk of heavy metals regarding the dust in our homes?
If you live near industries that are creating dust or creating smoke, then yes, you would see that in your homes. And we've seen that even in some of the Australian towns that we've sampled, there is lead mining or lead smelting, and we find a lot of lead in homes near that mining and smelting activity. And similarly in New Caledonia, we found a lot of nickel and chromium in people's homes because there's a smelter right in the city where we sampled from many homes.
My next question is regarding your research. What do dust in our homes tell us?
So they tell you a little bit of the history of the home. So we also asked people, as well as to send their dust, they filled out a survey form, and it had questions like, do you have pets? You know, how old is your home? Do you smoke inside your home? All of these questions. And we can match these with the dust results, and we can see that if a home is very old, we will often find high levels of all of the metal contaminants due to the uses of paint that would have had high metal content, and the use of pesticide or building treatments in the past. But also people with pets have more soil components in their home because maybe, you know, the dog gets a bit muddy and they don't clean it before it comes inside. And we can also see, as you were mentioning, that industrial cities, you can see the effects of the industry in the dust in the homes as well. So there's a little bit of history of the home and a little bit of information about who lives in the home as well. People who smoke in the home have high levels of chromium in their dust. So all of these things kind of paint a picture for us of who lives there and what the history has been.
on top of my head, I realized one question. So we had pandemic duration.
Yes.
Do you think, and we didn't go out for many days. Uh, so do you think that to not to go out, or do you think that is there any change regarding to the heavy materials on the dust in the pandemic? So is there any uh, findings which shows us before pandemic and the after post-pandemic time?
We didn't notice any real differences during the pandemic of the sources of dust in our homes, but I think that it's made us very aware of how important to understand what contaminants might be in our home, because many people now do much of their work from home or spend more time at home now because of the pandemic. So I think we do need to understand our home environment. It's quite important.
That's very nice. So, in relation to the house environment and the dust itself, what is the correlation between the ingredient of the dust and our health?
Well, we've been able to use some modelling to look at the health risk for the different contaminants in our homes, in our dust, and we've used the United States Environment Protection Agency model to do that. And it showed that in most countries of the world, there is actually a very small cancer risk from chromium and nickel. And in Australia and New Zealand, there's a higher risk from lead and arsenic. So 1 in 6 homes in Australia and New Zealand had levels of lead and arsenic that were a little bit too high. But yes, a lot of countries in the world had levels of chromium or nickel that were getting a little higher than they really should be.
And also, there's another question which comes to my mind. So you live in Australia and you have got aborigines in your country, which I believe that they are very distant to the technological life. So do you have any dust samples from an aborigine homes, and what is the finding of their dust?
We've
Is it lower?
generally found that the further away you go from the city, the cleaner the dust is. So our city life, vehicles, industry really does tend to create more contamination in dust than rural life. So we have had samples from some very remote areas and they tend to be very clean. I mean, the dust looks the same in the city and the country perhaps, but in terms of the metal content, it's much cleaner as you get further away from the city.
Okay, so really nice. So when it comes to the cleanest and the dirtiest, what can you tell about the countries?
Yeah, well, it really depends on each individual metal. So if we're looking at something like lead, then Switzerland, Australia, and the Netherlands had more lead in their house dust samples than other countries. And actually, Turkey was one of the lowest. Mexico and then Turkey was one of the lowest for lead. But then if you come to nickel, for example, Malaysia was the lowest for lead, and New Caledonia was the highest, which is not surprising because they mine nickel. But then Indonesia and Turkey actually was quite high in nickel as well, but not to an extreme level. But other metals like chromium was also high in New Caledonia and also in the USA, which we don't understand the reason why chromium was high in the USA, but that's what we found. And copper was also very high in the USA and was very low in places like Nigeria. So it really just depends on each metal that we're looking at.
So by looking at those information, is there any cleanest or the dirtiest country?
Not really, because it depends for each metal. Like each different country has different soil and I guess different industry. So it really varies for each metal by country to country. And as I said before, when we look overall at the sources, we come out with very similar looking sources in most countries.
And also, my last question is, how can we protect ourselves in our home environment from dust or from the, not just from dust. I think it is impossible to protect ourselves from dust, but how can we protect ourselves from the heavy materials of the dust?
Yes, well, dust is part of life, but first up, by not smoking in your home, you are reducing many of the contaminants in your dust. Also, we found people who had certain hobbies, like if they have hobbies involving lead, so maybe they make the lead lighting windows in their home, then that was creating contaminants in their home. So if you have hobbies like that or you work with metals, then be careful to, I guess, keep those hobbies and work separate from your living space. But the main advice we give people is to stop a lot of the contaminants from coming into your home, is to use mats at your door. So a mat on the outside and a mat on the inside of your door, to take your shoes off when you enter home. And when you vacuum, to use a HEPA vacuum cleaner, because it gets the fine dust and collects it, whereas some of the other vacuum cleaners, the fine dust passes through the filter and goes back into your home. And it's this very fine dust that tends to have the metal contaminants in it. And after you've vacuumed, you should mop the floor with a wet mop, and this will remove all of those fine dust particles. And I believe in Turkey that people get their rugs cleaned each year, and that is a very good practice to stop contaminants building up in those rugs. And if you have a dog or a pet or a child that likes to get dirty, keep a towel by the door and maybe clean them before they come inside, so that they are not bringing in outside dust to your home.
Right. So, will it be practical to change our dresses before we come into the house?
If you work with metals, so who work in a mine or a factory where they know that they are exposed to metal dust, then you should change your clothes after work. If you can't change it at the door, then very quickly when you get into the house, so that you're not putting dust all over the home. But I think for just everyone on a normal basis, it would be a little bit too far to get changed at the door. But take your shoes off at the door is a good step.
When it comes to, is it possible? That question also comes up to my mind very recently. So we have mobile phones, and we have got many electronic devices, and they are emitting some signals. So do you think that those signals might be connected with the dust to get much more heavier metallized? Is it possible?
I don't think that's really possible, no. But we can be very careful in our home not to use pesticides or chemicals more than we need to. So for cleaning chemicals, just to keep things very simple and not use very high strength cleaning chemicals in our home, or very high strength pest control in our home, and keep those chemical levels a little bit lower.
My final question will be, we had touched that point in our pre-meeting. So when it comes to COVID and other stuff. Do you have any finding that the bacteria or viruses can live better on the dust? Or what would you say? I mean, in general, about the virus and bacteria, in the correlation between the virus and bacteria with dust?
Well, the dust in our homes is a mixture of skin cells, hair cells, metals, soil, fabrics. And so it really does keep a history of what's happened in our homes. So in the dust from people's homes, there is stored a collection of the bacteria that represents the people in that home and the viruses that have been in that home. And we are actually able to look at that bacteria and look at things like antimicrobial resistance, which means will people have a resistance to using antibiotics in the future? And we are also able to look at the different types of bacteria in people's homes. And we haven't looked yet at viruses, but we did think about looking at COVID in people's homes, and it would tell a picture of where that virus or that bacteria has been in the past. You would be able to see, it's in so many percentage of homes in this country, that kind of thing.
Do you have any additional information that you would like to share with us?
We've also been looking at things other than metals in homes. So we have done a study on microplastics in homes. And that was very interesting because there are a lot of microplastics in homes in every country that we analysed. And we're breathing in small parts of plastic, therefore, when that dust ends up back in our air, in our homes. And we've also started looking at things like perfluorinated substances. So we think about those as being firefighting chemicals, but they also are in our non-stick cookware or in waterproof clothing and furnishings. And so we're able to look at things beyond metals in our dust, and we're starting to look at some of those things now.
Can you please tell me the substances? What is the ingredient of that substances? The last one?
Oh, the PFAS.
The fire extinguishing one.
Yeah, perfluorinated.
Can you please? Yeah.
I'll send you a message.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
So, in relation to that question, that information, excuse me, that micro plastical particles, are they unhealthy?
We don't really know. We know that they're showing up everywhere. They're in our oceans, they're showing up in our food, they're in the air in our homes. We sampled for them by putting out a small dish in each home and just seeing what fibers were collected on that dish. But nobody knows what impact they have on our health yet. We're still very early in the scientific process of understanding the effects on our bodies. But I think that if you can reduce your exposure to these things, it is good. So if we reduce the amount of plastics in our home, the amount of plastic fibers that we have in clothing and furnishings, this is a good thing.
So when it comes to having clothes, do you think that it will be much more better to have more cotton or more organic fibers?
I think that's a good thing, yes. For the microplastics, homes with nylon carpets, which nylon is basically plastic, they have many microplastics in the home. So if you have carpets that are made of more natural fibers, this is good. And I think the same would go for your clothing. So natural clothing would still make small fibers, but at least those fibers are natural rather than being plastic fibers.
Dr. Isley, I would like to thank you for your contribution regarding my interview. So I will hit the stop